Okay, I can't share. It's something wrong with my Zoom and connecting in this Mac. My name is Regina Grimmett, and I am the Senior Deputy Chief of Specialized Instruction with DC Public Schools. I am actually a native Washingtonian, born in Washington, DC, product of DC Public Schools, Janie Deal and now Jackson Reed. My mother's actually a retired DC Public School teacher. My background is I'm a speech language pathologist. I joined DCPS as a contractor many, many years ago. I won't say the time frame because I don't want to share my age. And then I left, did some other things in the field, and I came back in the school year 2004-05. And I was working in the schools, primarily elementary and middle school. As the years went on, moved up and became a manager for speech language pathology services, and then director for all of related services for DC Public Schools. And for the last year, I've served as the deputy chief for specialized instruction. The slides you can't see, I was kind of give a little bit of background, not knowing everyone's experience, knowledge, or about special education or how to navigate. We start when you think about starting early. We want to intervene early when we think about students in terms of having needs. And so many of you are familiar, of course, with Strong Start, which is not a part of DCPS, but Strong Start supports students starting at the age of 2 years and 8 months. For Strong Start, you don't have to be enrolled anywhere, just as long as you reside in the District of Columbia. Then as you start getting older, we have in DC Public Schools, early stages. Early stages completes evaluations, receives referrals, and complete screenings for students for children starting as young as 2 years, 8 months, all the way up until 5 years, 10 months. So if you think about that particular population, many of those students starting at 2 years, 8 months are transitioning from Strong Start as part of C to B transition. Early stages also does assessments and screens for children enrolled in daycare centers, as well as students who are actually not enrolled in schools. As long as the student's not enrolled in a charter school, early stages will provide evaluations and screenings for students between that age range. Then in central office, we have a team called the Centralized IEP Support Unit, or we often call it CIEP. They do child find for students between the ages of 5 years, 10 months, all the way through age 21. And this can include students that are in a private or religious school, as well as students who are homeschooled and registered through OSSE. And then once students are enrolled between ages 3 years and 21 months, 21 years of age, if they're enrolled in a DC Public Schools, you can make a referral and say that, I have needs or concerns about my child and want to find out they're eligible for special education. You can reach out to the principal, the teacher, the special ed coordinator, or even someone we call as the local educational agency representative designee, or the LAA representative. Should I take questions or just keep talking? I can talk.
No, that's great, Regina. Thank you. We're going to let Anna do a brief introduction of herself and what role she's in and what she does, and then I'll have some questions for the two of you.
Okay.
So we'll jump over to Anna.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Anna Cook. I am the Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator with the DC Special Education Hub, which is an initiative of the DC Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education and OSSE. We're independent and impartial, like the Office of the Ombudsman. We can help families with questions, concerns, complaints about DC public and public charter schools. And I also have my program manager here with us today as well, Hannah Blumenfeld-Love, who will also share a few slides and just get into a little bit more about how we're supporting families and what that looks like, and then all the ways that you can get in touch with us. So are you ready, Hannah?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. So we'll make this super quick as well. Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you everybody for having us. We are the DC Special Education Hub. We are pretty new to the scene, and we are here to support families throughout DC. We support all families with students in DC public schools or public charter schools, as well as if kids are preschool age, we'll tend to help there as well. Anna dropped the link to our website in the chat, but there are really three main things that we do to support in special education in DC. The first is our virtual and in-person trainings and peer-to-peer groups for families, schools, and LEAs, which are the governing bodies, of course, of our schools. We also have one-on-one support through our hotline, our online contact form, and community-based office hours. And then we also have really comprehensive online resources to support people anytime. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I did want to share some of our events that are coming up. We have office hours regularly. The next in-person office hours that folks can just drop into is this Thursday. At Martha's Table in Ward 8. We also have a Caregiver Connections event where folks can really just continue to fellowship and build community with other families with students experiencing similar things coming up on September 29th. And then our next training is going to be all about IEP goals, how to make sure they're appropriate, ambitious, and attainable, coming up on Monday, October 3rd on Zoom. We are always here to connect with through phone, through email, our website, social media. Triana is our third member who isn't with us this evening, but is awesome and will likely be your first point of contact with us. But we are really here to support with all questions special education, no matter where people are in the process. So whether you are just now thinking, I think there may be something going on, but I'm not really sure where to start. Versus if you're someone who's like, my kid has been in special education for years, but I have a question about this one specific thing. We are here to support in all those ways. That was super quick, but that's a little bit of an introduction into what we do.
Yeah, you might also see us at various events in the community. I believe that I got hooked up with the Education Council at one of the backpack giveaways. I think the one at Burroughs. So we really try to, meet people where they are, literally out in the community, and to answer any questions that they might have about their students. And it can go from anywhere from, pre-K to transition age. So feel free to reach out. And yes, the events that we listed are on our website. You can also register for them there as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Loretta's having some issues with her Zoom, so I'm going to ask the first question, and I honestly don't remember what our first prepared question is. She is sending it to me. How can parents know which schools provide what services, or are they standard, or I know we've talked about sectors, and then there's also all different schools. So how do parents know which schools provide different services?
So when you say services, can you clarify in terms of like what services, related services, assistive technology, but I can kind of summarize. Does that work?
Yeah, and maybe you can help us to understand what the varying levels and services are.
So when I think about services, I mean, that can include, a myriad of things, but in DC public schools, every school has a school psychologist, a school social worker, an occupational therapist, a speech language pathologist. There's also an adapted physical education teacher assigned to that school, as well as an audiologist. In terms of you think about those types of services. All students, if it's on their IEP, have access to all those services, regardless of their schools. We have 117 schools in DC public schools, and so for each school, there is someone assigned to. We make sure there's budgeted, and assigned for those particular schools, including our opportunity academies as well.
So they might not be in the building, but they are assigned to that school. Is that correct?
Correct. So for example, a physical therapist can have anywhere as many as, depending on the workload need, as many as low as 1 or 2 schools, or even more than 10, about 10 schools.
And I can just add on to that as well. It's similar for the public charter schools within the city. If a student has a service on their IEP, if it's recognized that that student needs that service, it will be met. It may look a little bit different. So typically schools will have, you know, a speech language pathologist, all of that on staff. Some of the smaller charters, it may be more likely that they're contracting folks in, versus some larger networks are going to have people directly on staff. But a student can get started anywhere with special education.
So if a student is enrolled at a school and their IEP requires a service, the school is obligated to provide it, whatever it might be. Is that correct?
So the LEA is obligated to provide it, which again can look different. So the majority of students, what they need is directly within that school building. For some students, like let's say they need a self-contained classroom, or they need like very specific all-day programming. That's something where they may there may then be a conversation around placement in a special program. But in general, an LEA is required to make sure that student is getting the services that they have on their IEP. Depending on the LEA, depending on the services, that may just look a little bit different.
And so to tack onto that, to Hannah's point, so if a student needs, for example, more than 20 hours of specialized instruction, we may have to, in DC Public School, we don't have self-contained programs in every school in the building. So depending on the student's needs and the type of programming they need, we'll try to, what we do is we find a program that they need, one, and then we find a program that's closest to their home. What we've done is really in the last, I think this is our 2nd year, we spent a lot of time looking at how do we make sure we have predictable feeder patterns and transitions for our students with disabilities, just like our students without IEPs in general education. So the last couple, this is our 2nd year, we've increased the number of self-contained programs across the city to make sure there's programs in all of our high school feeders. And so we have 9 comprehensive high schools, and we make sure that within that high school feeder pattern, there's programming for all our students, so they're not traveling across the city and things like that. So we're moving to make sure that we are bringing the programming and services and resources closest to the student's home, so they can actually have a predictable pattern close to their home and have the opportunity to attend school with their peers.
Excellent. I'm back. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everybody, for moving along. Love technology. I want to move on to the next question, which is a bit of a 2-part. How do you make sure a child has access, that they're getting access to the resources that were recommended to them? And what evaluations, and if that is part of how you make sure, what evaluations are done to determine if a student needs more resources or is not getting what they were told that they would be getting as part of like their IEP, or, you know, how do we make sure that that's happening?
Can we go back to the first, what's the first question? Your
Sure.
2-part.
Which is it's similar with how do we make sure that a child has access to their services? So if a school most closest to their house, like that they're going to that particular school, or if they're being assigned to a particular classroom or teacher, how do we know that that's actually happening?
You know, I think that's a really good question. In every building, we have that local educational agency, kind of a special education, like designee rep person. And that person, in addition with the principal, is really the person to make sure those things are happening in the building. One way is parents can find out if those things are happening, or a couple different ways. One, of course, you have the annual IEP meeting, which happens, you know, at that certain time. but also parent-teacher conferences. Also, the quarterly IEP report card, progress report cards are provided to families to let them know how students are doing. And always, honestly, parents, we don't want them always calling the central office of the chancellor. It's asking the teacher, it's, setting up a communication plan or platform with the teacher. I've seen plenty of teachers who are like emailing, letting the parents know how the student's doing, if they have access to everything, things like that. And also parents can just honestly ask. But those are the ways that in terms of centrally, we do monitoring. We have a central office cluster-based monitoring team. We have a manager of accountability that does do some level of oversight at every school and every cluster in conjunction and collaboration with the instructional soup and principal. So that's one way. So the second part of your question, if a school says maybe students not making the level of progress we need, or one if they have enough resources, then at any time, regardless of the IEP sort of timeline or the eligibility timeline, the team may request additional assessments to determine what additional supports or services a student may need. And that may include a psychological assessment or an assessment from a different related service provider.
Thank you. Anna or Hannah, do you have anything additional to add to that?
I just want to reiterate that communication is really what's key. Previous to my work here, I was a special education teacher, and special education teachers are phenomenal people who definitely will foster that relationship and want to work with parents and want to work with teams to make sure that kids are getting what they need. So definitely, I know that anytime a parent reached out, anytime a parent had information too about hey, I'm noticing this thing at home. Are you noticing that in this classroom too? That is so vital, because special education really at its core is about the village and is about the team coming together to support kids with what they need. So that constant communication is helpful for the parent, is helpful for the teacher, and is really helpful for the kid, of course.
Yeah. I'm just going to read something on top of that. And I think what Hannah's saying is actually pretty important, because I think if we didn't know that before in terms of the communication and ongoing communication before the pandemic, we definitely learned that during the pandemic, right? In terms, we had to find another way to communicate with our families, and also to make sure our students were supported at home. So I think teachers definitely, and parents learned that, even, email and, video calls, things like that are even an option to even connect with parents. And it's so important and crucial to use those platforms.
Absolutely. And I would just add on, a lot of the work that we do at the Special Education Hub, sometimes parents come to us and they're just like, well, I don't know what's going on. And you're like, okay, so let's facilitate that communication, and just encouraging them to, understand what their rights are, but also, just be highly involved. We want to foster as much parent engagement as we possibly can. So, just coaching parents into understanding how they are a valued member of the IEP team is really important, as well as the importance of data. So, when they're going through that initial eligibility and evaluation process, explaining how the school uses data to determine what assessments are appropriate for their students. And if further assessment is needed in order to implement their IEP programming or to better understand how to work with a student, that's all part of the parent right process. So that's really what we're guiding them through.
Great. Thank you. Yes, communication. I think that was the main thing that I even pushed even at my job, is just overly communicate. I'll let you know if you're telling me too much. So it's been again, the same thing's kind of continuing now, even as we're trying to normalize things. It's just let me know. Nobody is psychic. Please communicate with me. Let me know what's going on.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I think also parents can at least share with teachers that while it's great that you are sending emails, I'm not an email person. I like a text or things like that. So we also, it's the method of communication is crucial. I'm not a Zoom person, so it's not my method of communication. But for example, finding out what's the best way to connect with parents is also important. What's the method they prefer?
Yes, great point, great point. Thank you. Okay. So are there any particular schools that do not have, that are not able to provide access to services for students? And if so, what have been the barriers to prevent some of these schools from being able to gain access to these services for young people? Or are there certain services that are a little more difficult to provide access to for young people?
Well, I'll say this. Since the pandemic, recruitment looks different across the country. I speak regularly with the Office of General Counsel, as well as other colleagues in other school systems. There's challenges since the pandemic about securing teachers and staff to come work in person in schools. So that's been a challenge. I know in DCPS, we have been working towards using different ways to staff those high need areas like special education teachers, speech language pathologists, and even this year social workers, which includes increasing our partnerships with contractors and vendors that have a larger net outside of this particular DMV area, but in terms of have a national presence to help fill our needs. So we've actually, in DCPS, we are actually partnered with an entity that's actually helping us with special ed teachers and substitutes as a contractor, actually, long-term contract. So have to think about it differently in terms of the regular ways we staff schools.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Was a great point to bring up, Regina. And I mean, that's something that we're seeing, like you said, across the country, across the city, in both public and public charter schools. And I think it comes down to all of us having to kind of reconsider like what the purpose of services are and how we meet that purpose. And I hate saying this, and then I always say it, this new normal, right? But that is where we are. And so I know like all of our schools are out there working so hard to make sure that kids are getting exactly what they need. And right now we're in a unique place where some of the ways that's being delivered are different from how they've been in the past.
Great. Thank you. Anna, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, they covered it beautifully.
I think I'm freezing a little bit. Okay. And let's see here. So those are our panelist questions for right now. We're going to have Miss Nicole share with us. Thank you for being here, Nicole. We're going to let you speak a little bit about who you are, who your children are, where they attend school, and what has been your experience with trying to navigate the school system for a child with special needs.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Nicole Johnson Douglas. I'm a native Washingtonian, a native Ward 5 resident, and I reside in the Bloomingdale area. The same place of my birth is the same place where I am raising my two children, one of which receives special education services and has an IEP and is on the autism spectrum. The other, we have made the decision to take out of DC public charter schools and place into private schools. But the one experience we'll talk about is the one with the third grader. He's now a third grader, and he's in third grade. He's been to 3 schools, and he's only in third grade. This year is the first year that he's in a school that is in close proximity to our home. We have from pre-K 3 to kindergarten, we traveled to Ward 8. And so we did the reverse of what people were doing. Most people were traveling east of the river to come west of the river, but we traveled west of the river to go east of the river. Why? Because of the lottery. And so from first grade and second grade, we traveled to Ward 7. Again, the southernmost points of both of those wards is where they were in school. I will say that because of the type of parent that I am, because of the advocate that I already am, and because of the opportunities and positions that I've had within the city, I did not have a personal problem navigating the special education system. However, that is not the story of many parents that I've talked to, that I've worked with. Not to mention, I was the parent board member of the school that my kids attended that was in Ward 8. So of course that looked different for them. But we've talked a lot. And let me say that I am a member of PAVE, Parents Amplifying Voices in Education, and I've been a part of PAVE since they started. I'm currently on the Ward 5 board, but I've served on the Ward 8 board as well as the citywide board, and also was a community change fellow for PAVE. And I'm also a member of the Parent and Alumni Leadership Council for the DC Public Charter School Board. So we've talked a lot about DC public schools, and I appreciate the conversation. But with parents, the biggest thing that parents have to navigate is not the things that was shared today, because we know that that's the information that is oftentimes shared with the community, but it's the real life situations that actually happen. And so what I wanted to definitely point out was the issue of access. I heard the question that where you asked, are there schools that, just don't provide or can't provide? And I know firsthand, as being a parent of a charter school that was in startup mode, that there were services that my son did not receive. And like I said, he's on the autism spectrum. They could not keep a speech language pathologist. They could not hire the appropriate occupational therapist. And then for the first year, they did not have an ABA. And because I was able to navigate the system, I was able to get him the resources and services that he needed. That was again with the support of myself and my now late husband. We worked hard to get him what he needed. But the access really is not there for some of our children that are at most need for them. It's there on paper. We oftentimes say that schools have it if we want to be transparent, but when it's time for our children to walk into it, it's not there, and it's not there at the spirit of excellence where it should be for our children. I oftentimes tell people that my son is not your data point or your statistic. And so if you're not going to actually provide the services that my son needs, please don't tell me that you have it. Please don't get my hopes up. Please don't get my son's hopes up, because my son is not going to be one of the statistics. The other thing that parents have an issue with is transparency. We are not really given the information that we need to get. And again, I'm a very involved parent, so I get the information between PAVE giving me the actual data, real life data, and not just what is presented to the council or to the DC Public Charter School Board, or what a number of our charter schools put on their end of the year reports. It's bigger than that. And so I have really been on a mission of really helping parents to ask the critical questions, because oftentimes parents don't know what those critical questions look like. They don't really know their full rights. And while we appreciate that there are places where parents can go, not many parents have access to going to those places to actually get the support that they need. And the other thing that we had a lot of issues with is the issue of a number of the schools that receive school-based mental health dollars. Because there is a lack of clinicians, there is not opportunity for children in some of the charters that have IEPs to receive the services through the school-based mental health program. Wow, a lot of people don't know that, but it happens. And so in 2 out of 3 schools that my son attended, he did not qualify to receive services from the school-based mental health program. And let me say, the second school that he attended, in the midst of everything that he was going through, in the midst of navigating his diagnosis, being a young child on the autism spectrum, we had the biggest thing to happen in our life, the biggest life-changing event. And that was my husband passed away, my kid's father passed away. And he still did not qualify for the school-based mental health program because they were only catering to children who did not have an IEP. Now, fast forward to us now being at a school west of the river, totally different. He now is receiving grief counseling from the school-based mental health organization that is at his new school. His occupational therapist is on staff. His speech language pathologist is on staff. The ABA therapist is on staff. So we are no longer dealing with contractors who don't know him, who don't know the school, but we are dealing with now really creating the village and team that will support him to being the best that he can be. So one thing that I have really been passionate about is also the idea of there being a backlog for assessments. Many parents, especially during the pandemic, if we want to be truthful, many parents had to pay for their kids to receive assessments because there was a backlog, and they were saying, there weren't enough clinicians and they couldn't do this, and we didn't have enough manpower. And so parents began paying for students to receive the proper assessments that they needed so that they could receive the proper services. I will tell you that we did not go through any program within the District of Columbia to get our son diagnosed. We went through the Children's Hospital Autism Center, thanks to the school psychologist at his first school who made the referral. And we went through that, and it was an 18-month wait for us to get him fully assessed. But we came out with a complete assessment that allowed him to get the services that he needs to receive. And so it's critical for parents to have conversations like this and to be a part of conversations like this, but it's also critical for parents to be able to really have those go-to people inside of the school. It's good that we have, for DCPS, there are, central office staff and things of that nature, but a lot of what happens in the development, and well, everything that happens within the development of the IEP happens within the individual school. And so we need to be sure that parents have the access and the ability to be able to know their rights, and not just know their rights, to be able to know what that schedule needs to look like. I was that parent that when my kids transitioned to a new school, I was that parent, like, by law, I'm supposed to have a 30-day review. When is my 30-day review? We are outside of the window of the 30-day review. We are now marking 45 days. We are now hitting 60 days. Now we're out of compliance. And so it's critical that parents are able to be their child's first line of defense, their child's first advocate. Because I tell people all the time, I am Reagan's first advocate. I am Reagan's chief advocate. And what I did not say is what I do professionally is I advocate for children with special needs. And so I am an advocate. Oftentimes, I'm that person that shows up for families in other schools. And so I've really had to make the reverse and now say I need to show up for my own son, the same way that I show up for other families, the same way that I'm filing different paperwork for students to receive what they need to receive. The same way I show up in court for other children, I need to be able to show up for my own. But again, my experience is totally different from most parents because I found myself in the know. I found myself connected to people in the know. But the people who need it most, they are the furthest removed from it. And I believe that that is where we need to strengthen our special education system, in ensuring that we are providing access, access of service, access of information, access of support for caregivers to those who are furthest removed from it. And so that's been my story. And I always tell people, I never leave people without inviting them to read something new or to get a better understanding of different things. And so I have a group of parents that I'm working with. Started with a group of my friends in Ward 5. We all have school age kids. But now it's now branched out to be even more. And we're working on just a whole lot of things with child development. And so we are collectively reading this book. And it's called We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation. And so this book has really, I gifted this book, let me say, to my son's teacher, his teachers, both his inclusion teacher and his general ed teacher, and to the SPED coordinator at his school, and to his case manager, and to a couple of other people on our team when we had our 30-day review. I gifted them this book so that they can understand that every child who has a disability is different. And there is no cookie cutter to how we educate them. And what works for one may not work for the other, but it is our job as the team to figure out what works best for that child. And as a parent, I tell people all the time, I am number one on the team, and behind me is everybody else from the school. And if I'm not in agreement with what is being presented and written in the IEP, then I, as a parent, must know how to speak up and must not be afraid to speak up. But then I also must have the support in place so that when I speak up, I have people to galvanize to support me in what I'm doing. And so that's been my story with my son. I will tell you, he is enjoying his new school. It is everything that I believe that his daddy wanted for him, everything that I have ever wanted for him. He's thriving. And the last thing, let me say this, because I had the biggest issue with disciplinary issues with my son. And many of, and again, I only can speak on the charter side because my son only went to charter schools, but many of the school leaders in our charter schools are not following laws that are in place when it comes to discipline. I had to be that parent that each time they wanted to try to suspend my baby for having a what they classified as a meltdown and all types of things. I was that parent. I heard some of you all say you're from the ombudsman's office. I was that parent that called the ombudsman's office, the Office of Student Advocate. I relied heavily on the vehicles that are in place for DC. But I was also that parent that said, okay, if you send my son home, by law, it also says that you are to make make adjustments so that my son can receive his related services. And if you're not willing to do that, then my son will be in school. And you know, I had some pushback from one school leader until I actually bought the actual document in to show them this is what the law says. And so that then goes back to, again, educating our parents so that our parents can stand, but then also utilizing other parents to help parents to navigate the system. So that's been my story with my Reagan. I definitely appreciate our journey because I believe that our journey is one that will help other parents as they go on their journey.
Whew. Thank you so much. That's, well, one, great information. I appreciate your spirit, and you mentioned the spirit, like having like you might have the services, but they don't have like that spirit of actually providing great service. But I appreciate your spirit and how you speak and clearly present what's happening. And that this is your experience, that there are many experiences and they're all different, right? Appreciate your words. I want to give a brief moment for Regina, Anna, and or Hannah to respond to some of the things that you mentioned. And then we'll open up for questions from other people.
I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for speaking. Every time I end up in a space with a parent advocate speaking, it's just like so reaffirming of the work that we do. And I really am so grateful for that. I also just like so many of the things that I heard you speaking about making sure that there's access for those who have had access blocked for so long, making sure that families have the tools to know what their rights are and how to speak up for them when they see that they're not either being honored or being prioritized. And that is so much of what we're working on. And so I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to share this space and to share like so many of the things that maybe weren't available in the district before are things that we have had the privilege of working to develop so that we can reach out to those folks, and so that we can have those parent rights trainings. And we had like a SPED terminology training recently because there are so many barriers, there's so much information. And so making sure that we can continue to share that with everybody, and not just the parents in certain schools and not just the parents in certain wards, but with everybody.
Yes, and I'll just hop onto that by saying, for one fellow parent of a student with a disability who navigated the system with tremendous difficulty and dealt with a lot of those same issues, like with behavior and things like that, I absolutely relates. And everyone's journey, while it is different, there are many of the same problems that align across the district. And as Hannah said, we are so humbled and grateful to be able to have the opportunity to help other parents navigate that as well. I really wish you would have kind of went first. That way we could have, really had a great in-depth discussion, because we could have a year-long conversation about all of this. So I just really appreciate you speaking up and your advocacy. Clearly, you're giving back and you're helping other families. So I know you understand how amazing it is to be able to help others as well.
So yeah, I thank you again. I want to say the same thing. I actually took notes, and I wish I could invite you to our next all hands for, and I might reach out to you for DSI, because I think when we think about, we do a lot of things centrally, to your point, but we always say to schools and families, we're not there every day, right? And so we need you at the local school to answer the questions, connect with the families and things like that. So one of the things I heard you talk about was making sure information is transparent, services are accessible, and support and things like that. So one of the things, and I'm going to drop in the chat, I'd love for you to provide feedback, Dr. Douglas, is we've in DCPS, we've always had a family guide that was like a PDF document that wasn't very accessible, I think. And so we've changed, we created a Wix site, not as beautiful as the SPED hub from Hannah, but we've created a website that's actually a little interactive, and it changes languages based on the parents' home language. I'll drop in the chat, but I love to get your feedback. And I'm thinking, just listening to you, that even putting in some information in small snippets, videos, like 5 minutes, about some of the topics you talked about, access, the rights, small links to trainings that we have already available on DCPS YouTube. So I'm always looking for solutions and different ideas. So I'd love your feedback and input as well, because you sound like a great resource.
Great. Thank you so much. I also wanted to offer my condolences for the loss of your husband. I'm impressed, just so impressed and thankful for your strength for being there for your children and also having to push for your son to make sure he has the things that he needs. So my heart goes out to you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and being present and listening and providing information. I want to open up for questions because I could ask, a whole bunch of questions and just talk, but I want to open up the floor to others who may have some questions. So please just turn off your mic and go ahead and speak. And if it gets too fumbly, then I'll go ahead and call on people. Oh, Sharice?
Thank you. And again, thank you, Nicole, for your testimony. I mean, that was incredible. What can organizations like us, Ward 5 Education Equity Committee, what can we do to further support special education? We know it's not cookie cutter. We know that it's a range of services for varying types or categories of special needs. What can we do to further support overall special education in terms of strategy, in terms of support, in terms of advocacy? How can we better support?
So let me start by saying, yes, I live in Bloomingdale. And I went to school in Ward 5, right? But and I went to my neighborhood school in Ward 5, which is now closed. But my children do not go to our neighborhood school. And part of the reason why my son does not go to our neighborhood school, and everyone knows I live in Bloomingdale, so it's likely Langley, right? So part of the reason he doesn't go to Langley is because when we presented all of his documents, Langley's team wanted to put him in well, let me just let me just be transparent. Langley's team wanted to put him in a class of all students who were on the spectrum, right? And anyone that knows about children on the spectrum, you know that they mimic behaviors. And so my son did not need to be put in that type of classroom. And so what he needed was more of an inclusion model. And while we advocated for such, they just did not want to do that. And so one thing that the Ward 5, and I want to call y'all Education Council because that's how long I've been around, right? I've worked for former council members and that's what it was. So I got to get used to this new name. But one thing that you all can do is, like, the word equity is in your name, right? And so we want to be sure that there is equity in education, even in special education. And so that involves those things that I talked about: transparency, like really getting the data points and and going into these schools, especially in Ward 5, and really surveying, what is it that they have? What is it that they do well? Where are their areas of growth? So that as parents, because I tell people I can't rely on the OSCE school report card. I can't, right? But a group like you all could go in, or parents like me in Ward 5, because I'm going to be navigating middle school soon, right? And I need to be able to see that, someone who has my best interest as a parent has gone in to ensure that, a school just hasn't checked off that they have certain things, but that they are really producing and doing well with that, so that I'm not finding myself putting my son in one school for 6th grade, and we got to move them for 7th grade because they didn't have what they said they had, and things of that nature. The other thing I think is that the conversation starts now and well with this. really having parents to come to share their story, to really share their experiences, because oftentimes we hear from the executive, we hear from the legislators about what the law says and how it's supposed to be implemented and how it's being implemented at a high level, but never really how it's being implemented at a low level, personal, and practical. So I think more conversations, inviting parents to come in to share their stories, partnering with parents to figure out one thing as a Ward 5 parent, what I would have loved to have is, and let me tell everybody, I am not running for any political office in my future. Okay, so let me say this. One thing as a Ward 5 parent that I would love to have is an actual education guide, right? That highlights our schools in Ward 5, both public and charter, because why? They're all public. They all receive public dollars, right? And our kids can go to them all for free, and it's their right. And so a guide that really breaks down our schools, with practical information, um, with badges, so that as a parent I can go to there and say, you know what? I don't have to go looking in Ward 4 and Ward 3 and Ward 2 for this, because guess what? It's right here in my ward. I need to go and apply at one of these, rank one of these schools. But if a parent does not know, then they don't know. I was recently talking to a parent who said that her child needed Montessori, and they live up in the Brooklyn neighborhood. And so she said, my child needs Montessori, and there's not a Montessori in Ward 5. So then I had to say, well, yeah, we have Montessoris in Ward 5. And guess what? Not only do we have Montessoris, but we have a Montessori middle and high school that's housed in Ward 5, that's sharing the building with Perry Street. But parents aren't aware of that, right? I think that this group can really help with having the information accessible to parents, so that there is equitable education, because we know that equitable education starts with ensuring that those who are the least furthest away from it have access to receiving it. So I think that's one thing that this group could definitely do, not just for special education, but just for education period, to strengthen education in Ward 5.
I think it even goes even more broadly. The only thing I would add to that is also just like continuing like every day to break down the stigma around disability. So many of the issues that come up in special education could be helped so much by a greater sense of community between the people experiencing them. And often folks don't even know that they're not the only one, because they don't talk about it, because we don't want to talk about it, because they feel like, oh, this thing's going on in my kid's school because he doesn't know how to act, or this thing's going on, but I don't want to put her business out there. And so every time that any of us are able to continue breaking down the stigma around disability, whether that's by sharing your own experiences or reading phenomenal books, particularly those by folks who live with those disabilities and have those lived experiences, whether it's just like calling in friends and family when they say something where you're like, well, actually, that's not what autism is. All those things are so powerful, because I mean, I know as a teacher, like I would have two kids sitting next to each other in class that were having the same kinds of challenges, but their parents didn't know. And like, as the teacher, of course, confidentiality, I can't just say like, oh, hey, she over there is having the same issue as your kid. But like the ability to build those communities is so vital. And in general, like, we're all in this together, and the weight doesn't just fall on special education parents. The weight doesn't just fall on individuals with disabilities. The weight doesn't just fall on special education teachers. Like, it's on all of us, to make sure that the communication is happening and that the community is building, because it touches all of us in some way, whether it's directly or indirectly, and just continuing to fight that stigma and continuing to make disability seen as just another wonderful variance in human existence, is vital to the fight to improve special education.
I just want to answer or tag on to what you mentioned or asked for, Dr. Douglas. So thinking about like a report card or a data around how schools are actually performing beyond like kind of like central what we're saying. OSSI is rolling out a brand new special education performance report, or I call it CEPR, that should be released for every school in the district. It will be like a report card of how they're doing, not just compliance metrics, but also student outcomes across various pieces. So I think that's one thing to make sure parents have access to. I mean, we're still all learning about it, but that gets to the point of, it's not about the green check mark that everything is good, but in terms of like, what is the data showing around student outcomes and performance?
Great. I'd like to take at least one more question. We have some announcements after the Q&A.
If no one else is going to ask a question, I wanted to follow up with Regina on that report that OSSI is going to release. Now, with this, once it's released, of course, it's going to be generally, probably most likely on the website. Now, who will be the body to oversee performance and provide that oversight? Because we all know with DC government, education in particular, when it's time during March, after we do the budget hearings, then we go right into performance and oversight that the DC Council is charged with. But who would be providing that oversight to ensure that these reports are not only ethical, but also accurate? And we also know some of the implications behind that. I won't go any further, but if you've been in Washington, DC, any length of time, you know exactly what I'm getting at. So we want to know who will be the body to provide that oversight, and who do we hold accountable for those reports?
So yeah, they're just having information sessions like last week and this week, OSSI. So I think, you know, I can find out like in terms of what particular office, but I think what they plan to do, of course, is provide that information to each LEA or each school, and then use that to monitor, provide technical assistance, things like that to help bring, well, not to make an assumption, but in terms of like tracking and improving those scores and those outcomes, to your point. So OSSI will be the overseeing body. Yeah, I can send some links and information to Lynette and Robert as well about CEPR, okay? And the points of contact at OSSI.
Thanks.
Hi, Loretta. This is Tony. I raised my hand. Is it okay if I?
Yes. Thank you.
So my goal of being here was just really to listen and learn, but I would be remiss if I didn't share a couple of things that I think that could be helpful, especially to the question around like, what can the Ward 5 Education Equity Council do? I'm a former DCPS teacher and DC principal and charter network leader. Have spent the past 7 years training leaders all across the DCPS charter schools around all things related to inclusive practices. And so like I'm all about disrupting the status quo. Like that is what I tell everyone who I talk to whenever I get a chance to. So I think there are like a couple of like very concrete things that I think that people in this group could do. And so the first thing that I think is useful for you all to know is that DC is actually a part of an initiative on inclusive principal leadership with the Council of Chief State School Officers. And I think that one thing the Ward 5 Council could do is I'm actually the coach for the state of DC, and I think that someone from this team needs to be on that team. So that's like number one. Like as we are talking about citywide change and growth around making sure that leaders in schools are doing what they need to do to support kids across the spectrum of ability, we need to have more local voices as a part of that team. And so I'm happy, Loretta, to like offline like give you information around that. Number two, I think the DC Special Education Cooperative should be participating in this conversation. There are a lot of like, Nicole, I like on behalf of DC principals apologize to you for the experience that you had as a parent of a student in the DC charter school. What you experienced is totally unacceptable, and no parent should ever have to experience that. But I think to that point, there are a ton of charter schools in Ward 5, and I think there's an opportunity for them to do a better job of like more strategically collaborating around supports for students, because you have some people at some schools that know stuff, some people at other schools that know stuff, and people that don't know stuff. So what is the work to hold them accountable for collaborating so that students can get the services that they need in their school, in their neighborhood? So I'll stop there. Those are just a couple of initial thoughts and reactions. And again, Loretta, I'm happy to give you the information about the thing that I mentioned.
So tagging on to the thing Tony mentioned in terms of inclusive schools and principals. So, I mean, I tell the story, I came in DCPS as a contractor in 99, and I was assigned to Fletcher Johnson back then junior high school. And I did not believe, and I never was trained or taught to like, think about, to your point, like taking kids out of the classroom setting to remove them to provide the service. I was always trained and taught that when we think about making it, an impact and making sure that what I do is aligned to the curriculum and supports access and outcomes, is to, where appropriate, co-teach, collaborate, and embed myself in the classroom setting. When I went to Fletcher Johnson to collaborate on that piece, the Fletcher Johnson teachers thought, it was actually social studies, thought I was there to give her a relief and to give her a free period. So when I came in to do my co-teaching session, she was like, "You got this," and left me, okay? And so I said, this may not be the place for me in terms of DCPS back then. So I come back here, 04, 05, I said, I'm going to make this a thing. This is going to happen. So I've talked to Tony as well about this. And so there's some things we're doing in DCPS to really, really focus on inclusion, including that we have a new team, not a team, but we've expanded our team. We have a special education inclusion team around inclusive programming. We actually have a new Ward 5 school principal who volunteered to join the group that Tony talked about. And so she's learning how to be the inclusive school, programming principal leader in her building, brand new this year. As well as we are even expanding all our coaching and PD around inclusion, to the point that on our October 7th PD Day for teachers, the topic is around high leverage practices for students with disabilities, and all teachers are required to go in terms of gen ed and special education. So that's just mandatory that particular day. So if we think about, we're trying to move those levers, because we do know that in DC public schools, or in DC period, in the district, majority of our students are not served in a full-time program away from their non-disabled peers. The majority of the data, if we know the SPED landscape, students are served in with their non-disabled peers. And so that takes this here, a mindset shift. So I say for Ward 5, let's get some of our principals, charter or DCPS, to sign up actually for this resource that's available through Relay that Tony mentioned.
Thank you all. Yes, I will be looking for that information, Tony. Definitely interested in, want to see how we can continue to support and what else we can do. So please inform us, let us know, join these meetings, shoot us emails, and let us know what's going out there. That same, when you're talking about communication with that, it's the same thing with how do we help? We don't know sometimes where to start or what the priorities are. So making sure that you all who are in it every day can share with us where those needs are. Thank you. Robert had a question he put in the chat. Was it answered, Robert, by Anna? It was about addressing dyslexia and others reading difficulties.
Yeah. So I was aware of the law. I was just wondering like how it's going in terms of implementation, and whether I'm especially interested in like the staffing being able to do the evaluations that are required. Just wondering, I mean, it seems like an important initiative, but also a big one and maybe hard to implement. But I'm just wondering if there needs to be more advocacy to get the resources needed to implement.
One of the things we've done thinking about dyslexia to Anna's, I think it was Hannah put in the chat, somebody did, Anna did, that it falls under the SLD classification. We've expanded a lot of our resources around tier 2 supports for reading. We also in DCPS also have a reading intervention clinic. Are you aware of? We have multiple sites in DC right now to help support students as well. With them may have reading challenges and are reading in terms of space dyslexia as well. We even some of the psychologists when they do their assessments, you know, still often mention specific learning disabilities we may not outline or like flag dyslexia in some of their assessments, but in terms of the intervention, the goals and supports, they do address the area of dyslexia in terms of reading challenges and difficulties. And I know OSSI's been doing a lot of work. They have a new office or a new team there that's been actually building out and expanding some of the other pieces for the legislation, because I used to work at DCPS and they joined that team.
Cool. Anna or Hannah, anything to add in there? Okay. So I wanted to again thank Hannah and Anna. I just think it's great that you guys have a very similar name and you're wearing like the similar colors today in stripes. And Regina for taking time out of your day to share with us what you do and how you provide supports, services to our young people in schools, and to Nicole for taking time out of your day to share with us your story, your experience. Really appreciate all of you so much, especially in these times. Today's things are not clear as we're moving forward. And as I mentioned before, please continue to stay in contact with us. We have a couple of announcements if you want to stay on to hear the announcements that we have, and how you can further participate in Ward 5 Education Equity Committee. If not, thank you so much. Enjoy your night, and hopefully we'll see you at the next meeting. But I'm going to pass it to Robert for our announcements. I believe we have Robert, what's our first announcement here? We wanted to make sure that we thanked everyone here and those who are not here for participating in our back to school event that we had in August. It was amazing. I think we gave out over 350 backpacks, probably more than 400 backpacks. It was a really great event, well attended. And then we are also preparing for our winter coat drive. So we will be having some information about that coming out. So if you're interested in supporting or volunteering to help with our coat drive, we're going to be moving along with that really soon. And we also want to get started with some initial planning for next year's back to school event, because even though it's in August, we need to get onto people's radars about participating and donating money and in-kind donations for that event as well. So if you are interested, please respond to emails that will be coming out soon about how to participate for these events for Ward 5. Is there somebody on from Washington, from WTU, Washington Teachers Union, that wants to give an update today?
I am.
Great.
But I don't have an update. They just asked me to attend.
No problem. Thank you for being here. Appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I think Julia may have had to hop off, who was here from PAVE. So I'm going to pass it over to Robert.
Yeah, I think that's it. We just wanted to give a opportunity for WTU or to PAVE, or I guess we can just ask if anybody else has any announcements. We can definitely pass on the scheduled events from the Special Ed Hub to our mailing list. And I guess if there are no other announcements, I guess that's it. Thank you all who participated. We've had in our minds for quite some time that we wanted to have this discussion and are just thrilled that we were able to get these voices in the room. And hopefully we can continue working on this topic going forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great night, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Robert, stop record.
I can't stop recording because my main computer is it's on the main computer, and my monitor stopped, which is why I'm also on the phone. So
Gotcha.
I can't
This would
stop
be-
it.
Yeah.
It will eventually stop, I think, and hopefully save to the computer.
Well done to you both. This was excellent. This was just outstanding. Outstanding.
Oh, everybody helped. Great.
Well, all right.
All right.
Okay, everybody have a good evening.
You too.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Robert, did you see my message?
Sorry, I lost my monitor there for a while, but it is
No worries. So I'll
okay.
just be on the lookout. I
Okay,
just want to make
so
sure you saw.
send
It
you
is
the
still,
recording.
yeah.
Yeah,
I just wanted
can.
to make sure I captured everything.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thanks for coming, Sharona. Good to see you.
Absolutely. Have a good, you too. Have a great
You too.
night.
Good night.